Hi, everybody. We'll just give people a few seconds as they're just joining and then start. Hello, everyone. My name is Tarandeep Ahuja. I'm a partner with McKinsey and Company, and I chair the Asialink Business Advisory Council. And on behalf of Asialink Business, I wanted to welcome all of you to the launch of our new report on disruption and innovation, reshaping the regional supply chains. This report has been developed with the generous support of the Toll Group. So thank you very much to Toll Group. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation that we stand on and who have been the custodians of this land, and acknowledge and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Today's event will feature remarks from Thomas Knudsen, who's the managing director of the Toll Group. I think we're trying to work out the technology. Hopefully, Thomas can join us. And it will be followed by a panel discussion with some supply chain experts from the Super Retail Group, Foodbuy Group, as well as Toll Group. I just wanted to remind you that the event is being recorded. And please submit your questions online. Use the buttons for the Q&A session later on. Before we get into the report, I just wanted to share a bit about Asialink Business, as some of you may not be aware of what the organization does. Asialink Business exists to help organizations discover and unlock the Asia growth opportunities. We do this through a range of capability development programs, advisory services, and public events that we organize and assist organizations to develop essential knowledge of Asian markets, business environments, cultures, and political landscapes, as well as helping organizations engage more effectively in the region. If you'd like to find out more about how Asialink Business can assist your business, please reach out. And today we wanted to launch the report that we have just published. It's now available on the website. The team will put on the link into the chat box. What we're seeing is the impact of COVID-19, geopolitical tensions, rising freight costs, etc., have focused a lot of attention on supply chain. So this is a very timely topic. And the report looks at the unique ways of how what the major trends are in Asia and what their impact is on Australian businesses and how can we as Australia respond to that. There are four major trends that the report has identified which are impacting regional supply chains: resilience, technology, e-commerce, and sustainability. I'll take a couple of minutes to just talk about those. First and foremost is resilience, and the shift towards resilience has been quite well documented, and I think with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just put it in a lot more sharper focus. And businesses have adapted approaches such as diversification, onshoring, boosting their inventory positions to move away from just-in-time manufacturing to manage the impact of disruption. At the same time, governments are considering their role in how to ensure access to critical goods and services and making sure the economy keeps going. The second major theme is around technology. There has been a big disruption in technology, which has been accelerated over the last few years. North Asian economies in particular have been early adopters of a lot of the emerging supply chain technologies. If you look at China, the supply chain in the corporations are becoming a much more dominant process across, and it's being replicated quite rapidly in the region. What we are seeing here is Australian businesses at the moment are lagging on technology adoption. And there's an opportunity here to really accelerate the adoption, which would require greater government incentivization, particularly for SMEs. The third theme that the report has looked at is around e-commerce. The growth of e-commerce and consumer expectation is across Asia is increasing pressure on the supply chains. And what business needs to do is to ensure that the supply chains can meet the consumer demands today for speed, convenience, traceability, personalization, and service, which requires choosing the right partner to handle your supply chain logistics, as well as those who can help you take advantage of e-commerce growth opportunities. And last but not the least, there is a theme around sustainability. Customers in Asia are expecting businesses to demonstrate the environmental and ethical sustainability of their supply chain. So much bigger focus, for example, around modern slavery. New technologies can help businesses provide greater visibility and enable greater compliance. And governments can support sustainable supply chain practices by supporting regional knowledge sharing partnerships and frameworks. These four themes are quite interlinked and not just separate themes. And when you look at the four of these together, the impact is pretty profound. I'll just check. We have Thomas on the line.
We do. Can you hear me?
Yes. Excellent. So I just wanted to introduce Thomas quickly. Thomas Knudsen is the managing director of the Toll Group based in Singapore, where he's responsible for the day-to-day business operations for their Asia region, which stretches from Japan to Myanmar. And he brings more than 25 years of experience in executive leadership roles across Middle East, North America, Europe, and Asia, and is extremely knowledgeable on this topic. So we really look forward to hearing from you. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Should I get started?
Yes, please. Over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And thank you to everybody for calling in. I had a little bit of a Zoom problem. You would have thought that after 20 months of COVID, I would have learned, but hopefully this link is clear to you. So let me start with perhaps just putting things a little bit of context, because I think it's important as we speak today. It's very much with an Australian lens, but I think if there's one thing we've learned with COVID is that this has truly become a global issue, and therefore some of the challenges that Australia are experiencing now are not directed from issues in Australia particularly. So many of the bottlenecks that are existing today are especially in ocean freight and in air freight, are coming out of a very strong demand in the US for products and the challenges that's pushing down through the supply chain. So I think if one of the conclusions of the report is that I think it's important to look at this in a global context, because even the best laid plans in your business might be derailed from actions that are happening somewhere else. But I think if we drill into some of the conclusions from the report, I see around COVID-19 really this disruption of supply chains and the importance of having diversified supply chains. So being reliant on a specific country or specific region for key products has proven to be a very risky strategy. And COVID-19 was not the cause of that, but simply accentuated the importance of having that diversified supply chain. And I think we have actually in some ways been blessed. I think it's fair to say that China has managed through COVID very, very well. And as China is the major sourcing area for products in the world, I can't imagine what it would have looked like if China had seen the same levels of disruptions as we've seen in other parts of the world. So whilst it might feel painful, I think it's fair to say that it could have been much worse. The second part is really this idea of regional supply chains, where we've traditionally relied on sea freight and ocean freight in Southeast Asia and trades between North and Southeast Asia, where we've seen this emergence of new modes of transport, cross-border trucking, the rail links between Asia and Europe, and all these new modes simply complementing what is in place at the moment, but also to the point of having these integrated solutions, especially for e-commerce, that e-commerce has gone, I wouldn't say from being a niche industry because it clearly wasn't, but I think a lot of businesses during COVID has had to switch from a brick and mortar setup to having omni-channels, and that the B2C omni-channel via e-commerce has proven to be a differentiator for many businesses. And really that challenge of creating the technology that enables that, and in the back end then the supply chains has proven to be some of the major changes. There's also conclusions about sustainability, and again, 2 years ago, most conversations in the boardroom would probably have had sustainability at the end of the agenda. I would say that most of the customers I'm speaking to, and certainly also with Tall, sustainability has moved to the forefront. Different elements of sustainability. Clearly, modern slavery is featuring high in the Australian market for regulatory reasons, but of course also for moral ones, where I think we're probably seeing that less in Asia, whereas in Asia the focus is really on carbon footprint, it's on environment in general, and the other parts of S&G. So sustainability for me has gone from being a nice to have to being a clear differentiator. And I don't think we've seen truly how that will impact all of our businesses going forward. And then the last piece is really this thing about e-commerce and what will that drive of changes. I think what has happened, and that's not an e-commerce issue per se, is that the bottlenecks in global supply chains has also had a material impact on e-commerce. If you go in and put an order in for products on some of the portals that you might be shopping from on a daily basis, you're now starting to get notifications that products will only be delivered after the 1st of January, or certainly not in time to meet Christmas, as an example. So I do think that e-commerce, with the growth it's seen, has also started to see the impact of these supply chains. And as we look forward, and the conversations we think are important is really to say, how is COVID bottlenecks impacting decision making in the e-commerce space, but also in brick and mortar and other supply chains. And the importance there we see is really the focus on resilience. Many businesses have been focusing on just-in-time, very lean supply chains, holding significant inventory. We believe it's time to review that. It potentially diversification of sourcing areas, including if that has an additional cost, potentially having more inventory, further considerations of near sourcing, whether that's in country or potentially assembly in country. And those are all parts of the resilience part. When it comes to technology, what has also become very obvious is the lack of transparency and impact of supply chain disruptions up the supply chain. So how do companies get visibility to the impact of what does it mean when there is no raw materials going into a factory in China and Vietnam to my delivery dates in Australia and in other markets? So the whole element of technology visibility, and of course also the enablement of e-commerce, if that's not been a core area, has really changed the need for automation and the move towards digital. And I think the last part there in terms of sustainability is really that as this area is growing in importance, the importance of having data to support a sustainability strategy is important. We're seeing more and more stakeholders asking for data, be it on governance or on social, but certainly in the space of environment, and asking for specific actions to be put in place. And whilst that might traditionally have been within the controlled part of the supply chain, which is within the realms of an individual business, there are more and more requests to include the supply chain going all the way back to raw materials, to the manufacturing of storage, and then to the transportation. And getting that visibility, I think, will put pressure on supply chain partners, logistics partners, to give that insight to customers throughout the supply chain. So I'm sure that we'll get much more into detail on these various areas as we have the Q&A and the discussion area. So I'll hand it back to the moderator and be happy to elaborate more as we get into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your comments. And I'd now like to introduce our esteemed panel who bring extensive supply chain experience, particularly relating to Asia. So first, I want to welcome Kelli Eaton. Kelli is the General Manager, Transport and International Operations at Super Retail Group, which is known for brands such as Super Cheap Auto and McPack. She's responsible for international shipping, freight forwarding, customs, and inbound scheduling, and brings over 25 years experience across sectors, including manufacturing, logistics, and retail. Welcome, Kelli. We also have with us Andrew Brightmore, who's the Executive Director, Foodbuy Australia, which is a subsidiary of the world's largest food and support services organization, the Compass Group. Foodbuy works with suppliers and clients to support the supply of 90 million plus meals. In addition to his extensive career across corporate roles and consulting, he's also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Welcome, Andrew. And then we also have among us Victor Tan today, who's the Executive Vice President for Asia Global Logistics, which is part of the Toll Group. Victor's been with the Toll Group for over 30 years, including more than 7 years managing the Toll's operations in China. He started his career with a family logistics business in Singapore, so supply chain runs in his blood, I guess. We can't see you, Victor. Perfect. Thank you. And we've also received some questions in advance, so thank you for those. And I encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat box. So without further ado, we'll jump in. And maybe I'll start with you, Andrew. How can businesses transform their supply chain management and balance the cost of resilience versus the need for profitability?
Oh, good. Starting with an easy question. Thank you. Look, I think the key word you hit on there is transform. And I think there's going to be a suite of organizations that see this current COVID environment as a point in time, and it will be how quickly do we get back to pre-COVID behaviors, processes, flows of finance and supply chains. I think there's another group of businesses that are going to reflect deeply on how they've had to change their operating model with their own four walls and then the supply chain behind it and their customers in front of them, and say, now what do we retain going forward, and do we truly now take this as the opportunity to transform the business? The way I kind of reflect on this position is, from a supply chain perspective, we've all been involved in disruptions to the supply chain globally many times, usually a GFC event has been a significant disruption. This pandemic is something very, very different. I think if you think about this pandemic around, we're not quite sure where it came from and how it arrived. So there's no root cause to stopping it from happening again. We're not quite sure where it's going to end because there's variants coming and all that's still playing out. So it's not like a fixed point in time where the economy will recover because it's just a financial GFC episode. That there's an uncertainty in more organizations that plays back to what Thomas was saying on resilience. How do you make your future operations resilient for repeat events? Because there's no guarantees that this won't repeat or there'll be echoes of this going forward. And then on the other side, I think you have to marry that with the consumer. Today's consumer and the generations behind today's consumers, and all of us are consumers, are less patient. They live in the YouTube 90-second generation. They want to be able to go online, find, order with minimal amount of clicks, and it turns up quickly. And our supply chains under normal pressures are not built for that immediacy yet, and we'll have to invest in that at the same time as the traditional supply chain, is still living with COVID. So you've got these two, I think, converging behaviors that says if you treat this like past disruptions, like a past GFC, and you're waiting to see how quickly you can return to norm, I don't think that's the right strategy. It's certainly not a transformative strategy. If you accept that this disruption is the new norm, and you walk into it and embrace it and invest behind it, I think you're going to see businesses that do that come out far more resilient by nature of the changes they make. But I think their ability to respond and serve the changing consumer, especially the sustainability focused consumer, as Thomas said, which is a license to do business almost now, that's going to be key to your profitability at the same time.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Well, one of the big themes around the whole resilience topic we've seen is the significant impact of price increases for freight, as well as the high volatility in shipping. And Kelli, I just hand over to you to just talk about how our company is responding to this.
There we go. Got the mute button. Look, how are they responding? I mean, in terms of resources, people are tired. You know, we saw a downturn in around February last year in terms of volume, and then a very quick turnaround from May, and it hasn't stopped. So it's been almost peak-like volumes for us in terms of sea freight and ocean freight since May last year. I mean, we don't see, you know, from the conversations that we have and working with our partners, that's expected to remain. Based on our information, we don't see that getting any better until around 2023, when we get more ocean freight vessel capacity online and the demand starts to stabilize. I think the upside is we do expect to see some schedule reliability improvements coming in sort of the back half of next year, 2022, but the prices, you know, we expect those to remain high from an ocean freight perspective for another 12 months before they stabilize. So, you know, how do you work through that? It's pretty tough. You know, we've got a mentality that you try to get match fit, you know, have a good business continuity plan in place, have a playbook, work really well with partners. Our relationships have really held us in good stead. I mean, relationships that we've fostered for 10 plus years, we've really been able to call on to be able to support us through this disruption. And it's held us in a good position from an inventory perspective, because consumer demand, as you know, has just continued to go up and up, especially in the passion categories that we're involved in. So we have super cheap auto. We've, you know, so people with, you know, through the pandemic have been able to tinker more with their cars. We've got Rebel, so lots of sports equipment, kettlebells, fitness equipment has gone through the roof, BCF, all of our camping, fishing, and MacPack, of course, with our outdoor gear. So it's very, very taxing on the resources. I would say business continuity planning is important. Keep it updated, test it. If you are in a position as a company where you are really stretched for the ability to invest in resilience and resources, you know, focus on the top three things that matter. What are those top three things? How are they going to move the dial, and get behind those? Thanks, Tarandeep.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelli. And Thomas, I know you are very focused on freight as well and have a ringside view to the freight market. What's your view on this topic? Are we going to get back to the normal and when?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think, first of all, I think this is going to last for a while. And back to Andrew, do you see what's happening now as something we just have to get over with so we can get back to business as usual? Or do you see it as an opportunity and potentially a need to do something differently? If you look at what's driving the current problems in the supply chain is primarily the trade between Asia and the US, which is the only real trade that has grown compared to 2019. So whilst there's been a clear uptick in Asia to Australia, reality is the global trade has only returned to 2019 levels with a slight tick up. So in principle, the supply chain should be able to handle it. But because of COVID and the restrictions in ports, We've seen these delays in ports in the US and in Asia, and I think that will continue because there is this backlog of cargo waiting to be shipped, and there is this especially in the US now 60 ships waiting outside LA, which is tying up more than 10% of the global fleet. So I don't think there are any changes that we should expect in the next 6 months. Would be my conservative estimate. Air freight potentially could last even longer because of the lack of belly capacity on airplanes. So perhaps back to Andrew's point of view, I think it is time to look at how do you change your supply chains and transform them, and in particular this demand from customers of being able to receive your product at home within 24 hours. Clearly that's not possible if you operate with a pre-pandemic operational model, and unfortunately that probably drives higher costs on your fulfillment model. So I wish I could give hope to the people who are hoping that this is going to be over soon, but I actually think that it's very unlikely that there will be any significant improvement before Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, which is in February next year. But it could even drag on longer if we see that demand in markets pick up as COVID roll back. And Australia is a good example of that, where potentially we could see increased demand that would put even more pressure on the current supply chains. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Thomas. Listening to both you and Kelly, I think we do need to brace for a few more tough months, at least, if not longer. Maybe Victor, just shifting to you. One of the ways you've seen businesses respond to this whole resilience challenges through insourcing, local sourcing, having reshoring. How do you see that play out longer term?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think first, we need to understand this probably depend on how we view the impact over a longer term period. We first believed it was 12 months in 2020, and now I think we look at this and now we probably think that this is going to drag longer and is a multi-year problem. Every government is trying to solve the puzzle as to try and get the economy back as soon as possible. But we've been now working on learning to live with it. And what does that mean to us? I think the onshoring, reshoring, I think becomes a very strong proposition. I think bring the supply and manufacturing closer to the demand. And question one for everyone is when and how, as this can be a very complex and costly plan to try and bring manufacturing and the inventory closer to the market. And question two is, can you afford to hold this plan or ignore this even longer, hoping that the pandemic will be over, the borders will be open, and people can travel over and get their goods. In my view, the industry needs to view this with a lens on how to resite manufacturing site and distribution hub, and building an ecosystem, a local regional strategic supplier to support. At the end of the day, I think it's meeting and adjusting to consumer demand, expecting while competing on cost and speed to market. Speed to market is, do we then set up a hub in a Southeast Asia context? As Thomas has said, that you can move goods overland, and that could be one, that a hub somewhere in Southeast Asia that supply the entire Southeast Asia from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, all the way up to China as an alternative option. And the way I look at it is if we do that and plan it early, you probably have something in place in the next 12, 18 months, and that will help reduce the volume, the pressure they're putting on the shipping line now. That the shipping line is facing with lots of pressure, lots of volume, supply and demand, right? As long as there's more demand, your freight cost is going to be very, very high. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Victor. Maybe shifting gears to talk about sustainability for a minute. Kelly, question for you. How are leading businesses responding to this growing consumer concerns around ethical and environmental sustainability?
Yeah, Tarandeep, thank you. So it's a great question, and I think it was touched on earlier with Andrew. And look, leading businesses know that sustainability is more than just a license to operate. It actually results in better business, full stop. I think Thomas touched on it as well. It's at the front of the agenda now. It's not in the appendix. It's not at the back. So look, within Super Retail Group, we have a really strong focus on responsible material sourcing, recycled materials programs. And for us, of the 4 big brands that we have, Macpac's really leading the way for us. Super Retail Group as a business is also structured in such a way that we actually have a team in China locally, so boots on the ground, to really help us implement our responsible sourcing and modern slavery commitment. So I think what leading businesses are doing is they're seeing beyond it's just a license to operate. It's actually about, it's going to result in better business overall. So they're starting to build that capability. They're starting to build those relationships, because they take a long time to foster in order to move the dial and move that forward. That would be my advice there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kelly. And I know sustainability is big for you as well, Andrew. What are your thoughts on how you all are responding, and what would be your advice to businesses looking at this trend?
Yeah, look, I think I'm very much with Kelly. It's a consumer trend that has been massively accelerated through COVID. Today's consumer, virtually globally, in most of the research I see, the consumers coming out of COVID with a heightened sense of health, personal well-being, and a lot more connection to where they spend their time, which restaurants that you eat in, where you spend your dollar, being based on the sustainability or the ethical brand in front of them. And then you overlay that with the broader climate change global conversation as well. So you can't ignore this stuff, and you shouldn't ignore this stuff. And it's both an opportunity and a responsibility for all of us, no matter where we sit in the supply chain. For us as a food business, we have a global commitment to reducing food waste, to providing equity and surety of fresh water and fresh, nutritious food, no matter which community, which social background, where you currently sit, where you come from. It's a basic human right. And that's the business we sit in. But when you look at the supply chain behind us, I think at a micro level, it's an opportunity absolutely to look beyond the first tier of your supply chain, to work with the partners, the logistics companies. We do a lot of work with Toll. Toll is one of our largest supply partners in Australia. And we work with them to get deeper visibility on the logistics supply chain. What happens from point A to point B? How is material moved? What does the labor look like? In Australia, you've got the added element of the Modern Slavery Act, which came in 2018, which the UK's had since 2015. And that requires organisations to look down multiple tiers of their supply chain, right down to where the first mineral came out of the ground, and try and understand where risk is, whether it be modern slavery or any other ethical sourcing element, as Kelly's quite rightly spoken about. So at the micro level, we have to understand our supply chains. They're very long, they're very complex. You need to use the partners down that supply chain, including logistics partners, to help you gain that visibility. At the macro level, you're seeing governments move to net carbon targets, and the whole economy's got to move with it. The cost investment, the time investment is going to be huge for all of us to try and work out individually and collectively. And for governments, have got to work out where they're going to invest in the technology solutions onshore and offshore, and provide grants and funding in an environment where great ideas can cultivate and grow, your next Amazon or your next e-commerce solution or whatever it may be. I mean, you think right now the subject is around Tesla and cars and sustainability and driverless cars and all that good stuff and automation. Where does that play when you come into logistics? We've already started to talk about the driverless electric truck. When's the driverless electric ship? When is the electric powered port? So this thing is the right thing for us to think about, and it's only going to go forward. It's how we find our place on this and our ability to invest in either running alongside, being ahead of the curve, because the consumer is just going to switch from preference of where to spend their dollar to an expectation that every dollar they spend sits behind a brand where ethical sourcing is absolutely part of the DNA.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, clearly a big priority for all of us. Maybe shifting gears, Victor, just talking about e-commerce, right? We're seeing a pretty significant, it's been a big theme in Asia over many years. I think here in Australia, we're seeing a significant uptick come in with COVID as well. What's your view? How are these key customer trends like e-commerce manifesting, and what are the implications for when you think about supply chains?
Yeah, I like this topic here, and 10 years ago, I was looking at the e-commerce in China, and it's exploding. It's every year it's doubled. The sales volume. Alibaba is flash every 11/11. You look at it, it says this is something you cannot miss. You cannot miss it, even if you jump on the bandwagon. And today I think it's changed a lot now. And a key consumer trend, I think they are now very spoiled for choice. And there are a lot of e-commerce platform out there. Everybody's jumping on bandwagon, and you're not there, you're not push a product cross-border outside of your country. So it creates a lot of competition there, because consumer wants to have a very fast delivery. Today you and online retailer are just competing. First, when Amazon talks about a guaranteed 2 days delivery, and that we are all happy, all very happy. Sorry, a 2 hours delivery, and we're all very happy with that. And then now you got Foodpanda talking about 30 minutes delivery. How does it sound to you? And locally, we have in Singapore here, where Cold Storage recently come up and says 28 minutes delivery. So you're really competing in how you want to spoil your customer in e-commerce. Obviously all this will change, because it's different infrastructure is needed to set up to support this quick delivery, and then the processors that we have and the resource to support. You need to be able to switch very quickly, because there will be also all these events that's coming very quickly over the years to try and push your e-commerce sales out. And each of these can be 10 times your normal volume that you serve. So how do you then structure your resource? How do you plan your resource? How do you manage to spike? And I'm doing that in our Shanghai DC for one customer, where the spike can be 10 times, serving 11/11 e-commerce sales where they launch. And so 3PL like us, I think we need to be very quick in responding and be very creative in sustainable solution. There'll be a short-term solution that address to the spike. There'll be a longer-term solution as to how do I then invest in better technology, faster, smarter, and also deploy the people to cope with the spike, and then of course higher visibility. So yeah, that's something that we continue to manage and be relevant to where the trend is.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Victor. You spoke about technology, and that's clearly a big theme in how you respond to many of these trends we are seeing. Andrew, question for you on what are the biggest technologies you are seeing coming into supply chain, and how can businesses think about technology to solve some of these challenges around resilience, sustainability, e-commerce?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my personal experience of being a procurement and supply chain person for 25 years now across 17 countries is that in the procurement and supply chain world, data is very much underinvested in, right across industry sectors. And I think those that can produce and provide data up the channel, I think have a differentiator on their hands, especially when we talk about some of the pressures around sustainability and modern slavery. Having access to data into systems that people can measure and understand their supply chains readily is a very powerful tool to be able to offer. But right through, planning, demand forecasting, inventory management, real-time inventory, real-time reporting, data visualization, it's just a massive opportunity area for investment that just brings the supply chain to life. It helps I, as a business, understand at a granular level what's happening at any point in time. The more live data I've got, the better I'm able to run the business. And more importantly for me, it's data I can give to my clients, so they get equal visibility and transparency, and that equates to trust and confidence. So I think from a procurement perspective, investing in data is massive. We collect something like 3.5 million attributes of data every single day across the 200,000 products that we have just in our Australian portfolio. And then you blow that out to the 45 countries in the Compass Global Group. It's a huge amount of data. The trick is then converting and utilizing that data into formats that people can easily visualize and can make quick decisions on. Otherwise, you suffer from that paralysis of so much data, so many dashboards. You spend your time trying to read them and not acting upon them. So it's a delicate balance. But I do think just in the traditional supply chain and procurement methodology and processes, we're still massively underinvested in data as an industry.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Andrew. And Thomas, I know you are very passionate about technology as well. What's your view on the biggest technological disruptions that will shape this space?
Well, I think picking up on Andrew's points, I think this idea of data visibility to drive or to understand your consumer's behavior and having access to that in a way that you can manage it. I think for a long time there's been such a pressure on cost, which is understandable in terms of whether it's warehousing or distribution cost in the supply chain. But the value of having the right level of data visibility to understand what your customers are actually doing and translate that into strategies, I think is critical. And the second part, I think, was where Victor was talking about the need for automation. I think many have looked at automation as a solution to a cost problem, and thus often looked at it only really relevant potentially in high cost areas. But I think what Victor is rightfully pointing to is that when you've got significant peaks in demand, whether it's annual peaks or whether times of day, it's often very difficult to manage that to a manual work process, whereas automation in warehouses and so on can give you that ability to scale up dramatically without necessarily a lot of forecast in terms of demand. So I see automation as being both a driver of cost, but certainly also an enabler of managing these very short supply chains. It's hard to imagine that you can deliver a product even in a city like Singapore within 28 minutes if you're operating from a standard manual warehouse. You really need to have the technology. And then as we're doing with some of our customers here in some of the bigger cities is these dark stores where you push your inventory closer to the consumer, perhaps fewer SKUs, but really within a 5 to 10 minutes range of the final consumer, and then having continuous replenishment. It's bringing a lot of additional demands on this replenishment in terms of when it can take place. You don't necessarily have the ability to fulfill during the day because of traffic restrictions and so on. So if nothing else, I think that whole discussion we started with Andrew saying, are people thinking differently about their supply chains? And I think that transformation is needed, in particular if you play in the e-commerce and final mile space. There you really need to think differently because that will only grow. And I think scale might actually challenge you in that respect, simply just because the demands and the peaks might require this additional layer of technology and data to understand when it comes and how to solve those problems. So I absolutely see that, but also on a global scale within freight forwarding, the end-to-end visibility of being able to see where are my products in the supply chain, what potentially happens with supply chain disruptions, and what are my abilities to go in and offer alternatives. So if my cargo is on a ship going from Shanghai to Melbourne, and I know there's going to be a 10-day disruption in the port because there's industrial action, how do I get some inventory in faster? And how do I plan for that? So I think the whole idea of visibility of supply chains to drive ability to act on bottlenecks, I think is becoming more and more critical as a result of COVID. So there's probably a couple of examples.
No, thank you. Thanks, Thomas. And and a few questions have come through the Q&A. I'd really encourage people to share their questions through the Q&A panel, and we'll start to pick up on some of those as well. One question from the audience for you, Kelli, is as retailers, are looking at shutting down and closing stores, moving to more online, will you see retailers creating showrooms and their own domestic distribution hubs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I saw that come through the chat box. I've been with Super Retail Group for just over 4 years now, and when I started, the online or e-commerce side of the business was quite a small percentage from a sales perspective. In I guess last year it reached 12%. So 12% of all of our sales were for the omni side of the business. So that was split kind of equally between half between click and collect. So our customers were still coming to our stores, and half between home delivery. So 6% each there. What's fascinating though, when you look at that trend, is there's still 88%, even during the pandemic year that we've had, 88% of our customers still like to come to store. And that's the kind of brands that we have. They do enjoy talking to passionate team members about, the latest spots for fishing, where to go running, how the equipment works. So we're in a unique position that our competitive advantage is our bricks and mortar. So although we have the e-commerce side of the business, where our strategy and the 5 pillars across our strategy is really focusing on our 4 core brands, but actually growing our bricks and mortar footprint. So we're not actually looking to contract that. We're actually looking to grow that. And we do run, own and manage our own distribution centers as well already. But in saying that, one of the things that we've had to do throughout this period of time is really leverage our partners in terms of, if we need additional warehouse space because we're fortifying our inventory. The reality is that the lead times are going to remain long, schedule reliability is going to remain low for a while, and costs are going to remain high. So for us, I would love to have a different answer, for that question. I think it was Ben that posed that question, but we're actually continuing to invest in our store operations with some really great customer experience stores that we're rolling out across our brands. And so we're not contracting in that space. That's an investment area and our competitive advantage. Thanks, Tarandeep.
Thank you. One of the themes coming up in the questions is around innovation and different business models. So Thomas, one question for you is, can you see Toll offering a B2B matching service to compete with companies such as Alibaba?
That's a good question, and I think yes, but I think the challenge is in which shape or form, and to be honest, it's not something we've worked on for in great detail. I do think that when it comes to the innovation and disruption part, it is really trying to work on the multiple channels. And I like what Kelli said about the experience, right? So Alibaba and other e-commerce portals have really focused on the online presence and how that feels. But I think what is going to be interesting is the future model of how especially retailers use their physical presence to combine with their online presence. I think when you're talking about B2B, there's no doubt that that's an area where e-commerce, I think, will grow rapidly. And I don't think it's been accessed as much as B2C, but it is proving to be an area that I think there are potential rapid growth opportunities because of the sourcing that it gives access to in markets like China, which might go around the traditional sourcing, especially in the SME space. I don't know whether that answers the question.
No, it does. Thank you. Victor, maybe just for you on role of governments, a question from the audience is, what role do governments have to play to support supply chains in both the short term and the long term? And especially around sustainability and other things as well.
Yeah, I think the government play a role. But I must say that business must not just depend on government. I think the business has to be innovative themselves, and it must be problem solving, right? You have to have a problem statement as what you want to prioritize to solve. There are lots of issues in business in today's world in moving goods, but when it comes to supply chain, I think automation and AI data and Andrew talks about and flexibility and things like that. The government does play a role in there in providing the required funding support for SME. For a larger company, I think you can always do that yourself. But so how we then train and a pool of talent that is ready to support whatever technology that's going to roll out there, and educating them, and so you have a very ready workforce that is able to support the industry as a whole. And I think that's probably something that the government will play. But as I say, business still needs to drive that along as to trying to be better, to be faster, to be ahead of everyone in terms of getting your goods to the market.
Thank you. Andrew, any other thoughts you'd have on the government role?
No, I think when it comes to government, I personally I'm not a big fan of governments running businesses. I'm not sure there's a great plethora of examples of that working well over the long term. But I personally want governments to invest in infrastructure, especially in the supply chain side. So the ports, the roads. I mean, you look at Australia, the geography of Australia, moving things east to west or west to east and up and down is just huge. So investing in infrastructure, I think, is good for all parts of the economy. I think it's also good for economic growth and population growth. I think providing areas within a country, as you've seen through the EU and Ireland and other countries, where the government will provide incentives to help new businesses or technology businesses to invest and grow at a more economically attractive rate to bring new investment into the country. I like them there. And I think government helping to reduce regulation, red tape, makes the whole process more efficient for those who's got to operate in the environment. I don't know how much red tape regulation and the cost of red tape and regulation is involved in the whole logistics and supply chain channel. I'm sure it's quite high. So anything where, if we're asking private organizations to look at their processes to become more efficient, more cost effective, more automated, I'd like to see governments do the same in the processes they have surrounding those businesses' ability to operate. And then I think that the stuff that I'm a huge supporter is government stepping into the broader cultural challenge, as they've done with modern slavery recently in Australia, as they will continue to do in the climate change piece, so that we have, as a supply chain industry, no matter which vertical you sit in, a clear view of where the country is heading, and therefore where our investment pathway needs to be, so that we can support that in those bigger issues.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Kelli, a question for you around the geopolitical tensions and the implication. So the question is, super are very entrenched and China is the main supply source. How are the Australia-China tensions impacting your thoughts on diversity of supply chain? And are you looking to broaden the supply base to other countries in the region?
Yeah, thanks, Tarandeep. It's a great question. And I think what I talked about earlier was making sure you have a business continuity plan, that, you've got that list of risks and controls, and you're testing that, every year. You're not waiting until there's some major disruption like this. And, and the question's right. We are very entrenched in China. We have a team of over 60 people based between Shanghai and Hangzhou. But in saying that, that's not the only location we source from. We have a number of different locations. I think ensuring that you're testing that supply source every year, having that as part of your business continuity plan, they're important steps to take to test that. We also run data modeling over, where we can get our raw material supply from, where are other retailers buying from, what are other options. So that sort of plays into, our playbook as we go forward. So it's at the moment, we're not, apart from the obvious, Ningbo, Yantian, COVID outbreaks and concerns, we haven't seen a problem in getting our products in, from China at this point, but we're always looking at that from a business continuity perspective, running our risks and controls. So in the near term, we'll remain there, but always looking at it. Thanks, Tarandeep.
Makes sense. Thank you, Kelly. There are a few questions that have come up on the whole talent, capability, skill set issue. So maybe, Thomas, for you, how should we think differently about talent strategy, how we identify, recruit, develop, and retain our talent?
Yeah, I think I think first of all, supply chain, I think, has moved from being a support function to being front and center of moving towards delivering to the customer. And I think that probably and hopefully means that supply chain becomes more of a strategic priority in businesses in terms of how they look at talent. I think the second thing we've talked about today is this whole move towards technology. And I do think it's fair to say that within the supply chain logistics industry, a lot of the people who are here have been here for a long time and are probably less technology and data savvy than the people who are in other businesses. And that's why an Alibaba on Amazon is probably winning over some of their traditional competitors. So I think we've got to keep the capabilities we have that are really linked to the execution. But I think we need to find a way of bringing in talent that will complement our physical capabilities with the whole digital and technology side of it, and make it attractive and interesting for them to see the opportunities that I still think makes supply chain and logistics so interesting, right? You operate in a global environment, you get to deal with people and situations that are completely different every day, and how can you then leverage the technology to do that? So I think we've been given an opportunity because of the challenges that's been there through COVID to accelerate supply chain as a career choice. But number two, I think we need to make deliberate choices to get into younger and different capabilities within technology. And that's not only an age thing, it is different capability. The last piece perhaps is around diversity. We have a male-dominated industry in logistics, and we need to find a way to bring more women into the industry. I think that will be critical because it brings a different perspective on the business. And in particular, as the customer really becomes more centric to our delivery promise to the customer, shorter lead times and so on, I do think that diversity in teams is critical.
Thank you. Thanks, Thomas. And Andrew, maybe the flip side of that question, what would you recommend to supply chain professionals? What are the most crucial skill set, or what can they do for their own professional development to tackle this new era of uncertainty?
That's a really important question, and couldn't support Thomas's answer strongly enough. I think about my own, I'm a fellow, as you said at the outset, of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, one of the few multi-country certified bodies, and in such case a not-for-profit charitable backed body that provides formal academic pathways for procurement professionals and supply chain professionals. I still think there is a huge gap in people who have either chosen or somewhere fallen into procurement and supply chain that aren't supported by their organizations, or perhaps don't invest in themselves in the technical pathways to become really proficient in this particular profession. And I think a lot of organizations don't yet see it as a profession, as they do accountancy, as they do information technology and some of the other core parts of our business. So I would encourage anybody who is thinking of getting into this profession in whatever way, or is in this profession looking for further development, to look at the academic pathways. The material, the courses, the method of engaging with those courses is better than it's ever been, and really valuable. And I think at the heart of, as a procurement person, the heart of a procurement person is we're relationship people. It's a people business. It's about negotiation and contracting and all that good stuff, but it's relationships, and it's investing in those relationships. At the same time, the demands on the procurement and supply chain profession have never been broader. you're a negotiator, you're an IT expert. You look at the questions we've had today, everything from modern slavery through to technology, through to government questions. Yeah, the fully rounded procurement and supply chain professional is an expert in many areas. And I think unless organizations support their talent and individuals don't self-develop in that area, you're going to find yourself constrained in that conversation. But I think on the other side, what we've got to recognize is that as generations and generations enter the workplace, the profession moves to more technology-driven ways of working. So investing in becoming a technology-driven procurement and supply chain professional that's cognizant of data, can read data, can draw insights from data, can manipulate data, that proficiency is probably more valuable and will continue to be more valuable tomorrow than it has been in years gone by.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. I'm getting a lot of questions around the whole shipping situation. So maybe Victor, for you, anyone else wants to jump in, but with the challenges in shipping to ANZ and the recent surge in associated costs, what are the insights of what can businesses do to optimize their capacity through shipping lines?
Yeah, I thanks for that question. I think as I said earlier, is that it's probably supply and demand, and if we continue to create that demand, the shipping line is going to continue to have that challenge to be able to cope with that volume, and so that cost will continue to be very high in terms of being able to ship to ANZ. I think the shipper need to work together, and the entire industry needs to work together. What needs to be shipped, what can be shipped later, and how can we smoothen the curve in terms of not shipping everything together. Everyone comes in urgent and with product that they want. I think today with data, I think you can probably mine a little bit deeper as to data, as to what sells, what don't sell, so what can be spaced out in terms of us shipping it. I think that if we help the shipping company, I think that will also be helping ourselves in the longer term. That's probably my view.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I agree with that, Victor. It's, I guess, how could we help? It's providing the shipping lines, or whether you work direct with the shipping lines like we do or through the freight forwarder, just giving that forward visibility, as much stability in that forward visibility as possible. We know a forecast is just a forecast, but communication, open lines of communication, transparency, those sorts of things, being flexible together and having, robust and open conversations. If they can't move it this week, what are the reasons why? When can you move it? Potentially looking at working with your shipping lines on, within your business, working out your kind of priority product, priority 1, 2, and 3, or however you want to carve it. And then, working with them to say, look, these are the must-go items. That might take some pressure off them, and they'll be able to help you out more. But I think what we've learned is, the relationships that we've fostered with the shipping lines over so many years, where we've built that up, like they have paid dividends through this process. So, it's just investing in those relationships and, making sure that you're working together. But there are a couple of tips that I would suggest if you're struggling. The shipping lines are struggling themselves, but if you are struggling to get volume on board, just looking at those couple of items, that could help.
Thank you. There's one question around how different jurisdictions having different COVID approaches impacts people's decision making. Maybe Andrew, I'll throw it to you. The question is, if you look at China, they're pursuing a COVID zero strategy. If you look at Australia, different states have different strategies on how to combat with the virus. Do you see this different approach impacting how Australian companies are making decisions or should be making decisions?
Yeah, good question. Yes, it does. I think I certainly don't think it's helpful to businesses that's dealing across borders, and remembering that Australia is a massive export company as well as an import country, right? So if there's changing conditions, instructions, regulations at different ports, outbound and inbound, and then the supply chain taking stuff to ports, it creates uncertainty, and right now businesses don't need any more uncertainty, because a lot of us have spent many months and months to come doing everything we can, as Thomas started with, in being as resilient as possible, if only to make sure we can continue to employ as many people as possible, make sure they have a sustainable wage and can feed their families, right? That's priority number one. So the more uncertainty you build into a business's operation, certainly in the short term, the harder it is to plan, the cost base, the overhead, and everything else to help the day-to-day running of your business. I think it's inevitable. I think every country, every culture, every government is going to approach this in different ways, and they change their approaches through COVID because we're all learning together. That there is no rule book here, so I think we've got to have some empathy for that. But certainly in Australia, and we've seen this play out in other countries, most recently the UK. In Australia, even within our borders now, businesses are looking for clarity around vaccination passports, and when state borders are going to open up before we even think about international borders. And then you get onto the huge migrant labour that supports the Australian economy has been locked out for over a year and a half now, and we're looking forward to welcoming all that talent back in. So it's unavoidable, it's unfortunately inevitable, it's a huge burden on the business to have to work through, and for procurement and supply chain professionals, day one job every day is continuity of supply. We all play a role in that. So volatility or things that tackle your confidence and changing conditions just make that job harder every day. But that is the world we live in right now, unfortunately.
Thank you, Andrew. I know we could go on for a long time. The questions are pouring in, but unfortunately, we are coming to the end of this discussion. I thought it was a fascinating discussion and very insightful. Like one of the Q&A, one of the comments is, this is one of the best panels on this topic I have ever experienced. And I completely agree with that. So huge thank you to all four of you. I just wanted to play back sort of my key takeaways from this. But I heard three big things that you all spoke about. First is, the disruption is structural and here to stay. So this isn't a short COVID fad that will go away. There are pretty fundamental changes that are happening in terms of what customer expectations are, where regulations are headed around sustainability and so on, societal expectations, how we live and work, and also technology. So this isn't a fad. I think we are going to be in a different world. It's not going back to 2015. Number two, I heard was, yes, it is a big challenge. We are all worried about freight cost and volatility, but it's also an opportunity. There is a disruption with it brings an opportunity to actually innovate, meet customer needs in a different way, different propositions, and also to differentiate yourselves versus competitors. So think about it both as a challenge and an opportunity. And the third message I took away was, this will require a transformative mindset and approach. This isn't about incremental change, and the organizations who will win in this are the ones who fundamentally transform, take a much more of a stance towards innovation as opposed to incrementalism, and adopt technology, whether it is new data, how you work with different partners, how you deploy automation, just core basics around problem solving. But also it'll probably require a new approach towards our talent and capabilities in supply chain as a function. So those are my takeaways, and I think very inspiring and engaging discussion. Huge thank you to all our panelists and to everyone who contributed the questions as well. With that, we are coming towards the end of the session. We would love your feedback, so please scan the QR code or go on the link that is provided and share your feedback for this session. And if you're more interested in Asialink Business or about the report, just reach out to the team. And thank you very much again for attending our launch, and wish you all a great afternoon or a great day. Thank you.